You ever look at an ancient artifact and just get the feeling there's way more to the story? What if some of the world's most sacred art isn't just art, but a set of instructions, a technical manual hiding in plain sight for thousands of years? Okay, let's get into this.
So, could it be? Could these incredibly detailed carvings in ancient temples actually be technical blueprints for spaceships? That is the wild, provocative question at the very heart of this explainer. We're going to walk through a fascinating research paper that suggests, yeah, maybe they are.
So this all comes from a paper by Kavya Vadadi and her colleagues. They argue that certain carvings on the walls of the Tirumala Tirupati temple in India line up, almost perfectly, with modern space engineering. We're going to explore their interpretations, one by one, and see exactly how they connect these ancient designs with today's tech.
All right, so if you're going to try and reverse engineer an ancient spaceship from a carving, where do you even start? Well, according to this paper, you start right at the beginning, with the launch sequence. The researchers zero in on this carving of a creature. Kind of looks like a dragon, right? And they notice it's shown in two totally different positions. The first one is a standing, alert pose, looking like it's ready to blast off with fire. They interpret that as the ignition phase. The second pose is sitting down, more relaxed, which they think could represent a monitoring or even a landing phase.
And to back this up, they didn't just pull this out of thin air. They point to an ancient text, the Vimana Shastra, which literally lists fire as one of the 7 main power sources for a Vimana. So this historical text is a huge piece of the puzzle for them, linking that fire-breathing carving to a fire-propelled vehicle.
And this is where they put it side by side. You've got the ancient carving in that ignition pose, and right next to it, a photo of a modern rocket launch. The authors are basically saying, look at this. The visual parallels, they argue, are just too strong to be a coincidence. It's like a stylized but technically accurate picture of propulsion.
But it doesn't stop with just getting off the ground. Modern rockets use multiple stages, right? They drop parts as they fly higher. Well, the paper argues that this exact concept is also carved right there into the temple pillars.
Okay, so look closely at the carving. You can see a clear break between the top and bottom sections. But the key, the real mind-bending detail, is the wave patterns carved in between. The authors don't think that's just decoration. They interpret those waves as, get this, shock waves and heat flux, the same complex physics that happens during high-speed stage separation in our rockets today.
So if these carvings show a high-tech vehicle, who was flying the thing? Well, the paper shifts gears here, moving from the hardware to the operators. And they suggest the temple walls also give us a glimpse of what you could only call ancient astronauts. Now we're looking at these humanoid figures, but according to the research, you gotta look closer. Their clothes, the way they're standing, what they're doing, it all suggests they aren't just regular people. They're operators, interacting with advanced technology in, well, a space-like environment. The paper breaks down the visual clues. First, one figure seems to be wearing a helmet. Then there's the posture, bent on one knee, which they suggest might be a way to stay stable in microgravity. One is even operating this strange tree-like device, which they think could be some kind of energy system. And to top it all off, another carving appears to show hair floating freely, a classic sign of being in zero-G.
Okay, if you thought that was wild, buckle up. The researchers point to a carving of a monkey just sitting on a platform that looks like it's floating, defying gravity. Their take on this? Maybe, just maybe, our ancestors were doing biological experiments for space travel, sending monkeys up long before we ever did.
So how would these ancient astronauts even communicate? Well, the paper dives back into the Vimana Shastra text, which talks about a device called the Shabda Karshana Yantra. You can think of it as a seriously advanced listening device able to pick up and amplify sounds from almost 30 miles away.
And bam, that brings us right back to the temple wall. There's a carving of what the paper calls a lady astronaut who appears to be using some kind of hearing device. They connect this image directly to that yantra, suggesting it's a visual of the advanced communication and sensor systems you'd absolutely need for a space mission.
All right, so we've had launch systems, we've had astronauts. The case has been building, but the paper saves its most dramatic, and maybe its most compelling example for last. They're about to reinterpret one of the most famous symbols in all of Hindu mythology.
This right here is the Sudarshana Chakra, the divine spinning disc weapon of the god Vishnu. In the stories, it's this ultimate symbol of cosmic power. But the paper asks a really interesting what if. What if its mythical powers are actually just technical specifications for a highly advanced autonomous weapon? And the parallels they draw are pretty stunning. They go through each mythical attribute and match it to modern tech. The chakra is said to be self-guiding. They say that sounds like an AI-driven drone. It has legendary speed. They say that's a hypersonic vehicle. Its attacks are energy-based. That's a directed energy weapon. It can act as a defensive shield. Hello, plasma shields. And its inexhaustible power, we're talking about something as out there as fusion or zero-point energy.
So, after all of this, from launch vehicles to astronauts to autonomous superweapons, what's the final takeaway? Where does all this leave us?
Well, when you put all the pieces together, the paper's argument is that these are not just a bunch of random coincidences. They believe that, taken as a whole, these carvings could represent an encoded history of a lost civilization that had an incredibly deep understanding of aerospace, biotech, and advanced physics.
And honestly, that's the real takeaway here. The point isn't whether you're a total believer or a complete skeptic. The real value of an interpretation like this is that it forces us to re-examine what we think we know. It challenges us to look at ancient history not as something dead and dusty, but as something that could still hold incredible secrets.
Which leaves us with one last big question. Are we looking at the blueprints of a lost technological world, reverse engineering something truly divine? Or are we just projecting our own modern world onto the past, seeing rockets and drones where our ancestors only ever saw gods and monsters? For now, the answer is still carved in stone.